This is Insider Interviews with Epok Advice, where we sit down with some of the industry's leaders and hear about their vision for the future. Today's guest is Upkar Arora, CEO of Rally Assets, a leader in impact investing, and our first ever client to join Insider Interview series. Upkar is a respected board director, entrepreneur, and systems thinker who has spent his career helping organizations align capital with values. At Rally, he leads a team that works with institutions, foundations, and philanthropists to build investment strategies that go way beyond typical ESG, creating measurable impact without compromising performance. In our work together, I've seen how Upkar brings sharp strategic thinking, grounded purpose, and a willingness to challenge assumptions, qualities that are especially valuable to boards and executive teams navigating complexity. Upkar, thank you for joining us today. We're thrilled to have you here and excited to dig into your journey, your perspective on the future of investing, and what real leadership looks like in the impact space.
Kendra, it's great to be here. I look forward to the conversation.
So let's start with your journey, your background, and what got you to the place you are today, and why Rally Assets has your attention and your focus right now.
Sure. Well, my background is started off as being relatively conventional. So as a newcomer to Canada, with a focus on education and a profession, I chose to go into the accounting and finance education stream. And as a result, went to Waterloo, got my CPA or CA at the time, and then started a journey that really was involved in working in the corporate sector for what ended up being a couple decades, almost 20 years. And that led me to working in organizations like Nortel Networks, which at the time was one of the world's leading telecom providers, market value of $250 billion, to working with global families like the Reichman family or Peter Monk at Trizec, Jerry Schwartz at Onyx, and then spent some time working in basically mid-sized firms, taking them public, startups, and then running my own advisory firm. So it was a relatively conventional journey at that point. And then a few years into that journey, almost 15 years ago, I sort of wanted to think about how I could do something that used my skills, my experience and background, and the fact that I had some great exposure to some phenomenal business leaders that have led this country, but applied in a way that had more than just a financial objective in mind. And that led me to a conversation with Brent Belsberg at TorqueQuest, who led me to Bill Young, who was doing impact investing. And in a conversation almost 15 years ago with Bill Young, that was the seed that was planted to look at this world of how we could think about still using business as a force for good, but where the objective would change, not from short-term maximization of profit for shareholders, but thinking about using capital to actually do good in society while still delivering financial returns. And then the journey to Rally has really emanated from that initial seed conversation with Bill probably 15 years ago in 2010.
Wow. That's a great journey. And I think it's worth taking a pause to define impact investing and talk about where you think we are as a country and as an industry as it relates to impact investing today.
Sure, Kendra. Maybe to take you back to that point in time of 2010, the phrase impact investing was really coined by the Rockefellers in 2008. So it is relatively recent or new beginnings relative to the construct of the typical financial markets. And I started my journey in 2010, learning, dabbling, trying, investing in the impact world. The sector has come a long way since then. And certainly my journey that led up to essentially an acquisition of the preeminent firm at that time, which was a firm called Purpose Capital. So I acquired Purpose Capital to really create a platform to build on the very significant work they had done as an advisory firm, advising high net worth individuals, foundations, and others to think about impact investing and that duality or that dual mandate of both financial return and impact. So we have in some ways seen a lot of evolution over the last 15 years. What we're seeing now, and we can sort of come back to some of the challenges that still prevail in the sector, but what we're seeing now is there's much greater interest in impact investing, and that promise and hype of ESG that was never really going to be fulfilled in terms of changing real outcomes has now migrated to a focus on impact. We have been really slow to catch up to what's already been happening for many years, especially on the climate or sustainability. file in Europe. We're finally catching up in Canada to making a serious and bold commitment to impact investing. And we're seeing that interest really emanate from across the universe of potential investors, LPs, foundations, corporates, high net worth individuals, family offices, endowments, and so forth. So we're seeing that interest to be a lot more significant. So that's really helpful. And then I think what we're seeing now in this context of where we are in this pivotal moment is actually thinking about impact investing as a great vehicle, tool, and strategy to reinforce some of the other aspects of Canadian sovereignty, Canadian economic prosperity, creating jobs, and improving outcomes for people in Canada.
And you've assembled a really wonderful team. I certainly enjoyed working with them. Talk to me a little bit about how running Rally Assets and being in the impact space brings different talent to bear or different types of profiles into investment management.
So one of the key things for us was building on the core team we had when we were Purpose Capital was really to be able to walk the talk and really make sure that we were trying to build a culture and a team that really had a deep, profound passion and interest in the work we did. If we go back, and Kendra, you've studied, and with your background, you know this already, but when we think about what really drives people and how to get the most out of people, often there are elements of mastery, autonomy, and purpose seems to have a very, very significant role to play about people's sense of passion, people feeling valued, people feeling their work matters. And so the work we were doing really had this dual mandate. And so we were very conscious about making sure the values alignment in the people and the culture we were bringing was really reflected in both what we did, what our purpose was, how we recruited. And so I think we've been really fortunate. We've got a great team. We were actually at a picnic last Friday with our team. We had some new people joining, and the common refrain from new people is they've never seen a culture as strong with people so committed and passionate. But that doesn't mean that they're not talented in their own right, or they come from very different backgrounds and perspectives, traditional finance, big FIs, philanthropic ventures, social sector, international development, all these people that have come together with that really strong sense of wanting to do what actually makes a difference in the world, but trying to use the tools, their gifts, their talents, and their ability to really work alongside some really talented people to do that effectively and deliberately. So it's been great, and I'm really proud of the team that we have. I think it is phenomenal.
Yeah, you should be. I really noticed it as someone who dips in and out of executive teams all the time. I really noticed a collaborative and broader perspective from the team. So you should, feel like that's not just your perception. Let's talk a little bit about 3 years out. If someone listening to this is sitting on a large distribution platform, if you're thinking about where Rally Assets has room to grow or stretch, where's your focus? Who are you hoping to do more work with? Which types of investors are you trying to reach?
So Kendra, I may take you back, and it may intersect with some of the work that we did, and really thinking about why we reached out to you in the first place, because I think it's an instructive point that might be beneficial for the people that will listen to this. So I think where we were at when we first talked to you, which is now about a year ago, was really we had gone through almost 15 years of our journey as Purpose Capital and then Rally. We had done a lot of work in terms of really trying to be very clear about, you might call it our winning aspiration, but really I might call it H3 or our purpose. And in that purpose that we defined, it was really to think about how we shift capital systems to drive towards equity, sustainability, and justice for all. So we'd done a lot of work. We had gone through our H1, H2, H3. We had defined our 3 pillars and so forth. And what we found was, having gone through that work, there was some pretty significant strategic choices that we needed to make. And those choices related to how could we play in a world that advanced or allowed us to meet our winning aspiration in a meaningful way, given where we had come from and what had brought us success to date wasn't necessarily going to be what would bring us success in the future. And so in that construct, and then why we think, reaching out to you at a pivotal time was we needed really strong, capable advice. Our backgrounds in the space and our people is really from that impact orientation. It's really from a strong private markets orientation. And when we looked at the world that we wanted to occupy, what we saw was we were great on the impact side. I mean, we could go through, we're a B Corp, happened since 2012. We won Real Leaders Impact Awards. We have been the Impact Assets Top 50 Managers this year. So all on the impact side, we were fantastic. But when you look at the impact universe, it's still a relatively small part of the total investable universe. In fact, it represents probably 20%. 80% is still in public markets. So when we start to think through where we want to be to answer your question or lead into your question a little bit more in 3 and 5 and 7 and 10 years with that aspiration of shifting capital systems, we really concluded that our presence in the public markets, which we did have, needed to be much more emboldened, much more thoughtful,
Right.
much more targeted in light of what we see as some of the trends, the macro factors that were shaping that public market landscape. And so, our journey with you was really to think about where are we going to play, what capabilities or talents or expertise that we have, how will we win, and how are we going to make sure that we create a system to allow us to move towards that. And so in doing that work, what we've seen is that, and I think all of your audience will have seen if they've read anything lately, the world's in a significant level of uncertainty, of
Yes.
significant volatility. We are seeing incredible geopolitical factors, polarization of debate, divisive, more conflict, and so forth,
Yeah.
that's creating greater risk elements. And so when we think about systems in a world that is now compounding or exacerbated by this volatility and uncertainty, I think the importance of making the right strategic choices was really important. So, so what have we seen and where are we going? Well, one of the things we've seen is that we have to move away from being a niche player in the impact space to a mainstream player. What does that
Right.
mean in terms of the audience? As well, our traditional audience has been community foundations, mission-oriented investors, but now we need to mainstream that to larger investors. We have seen people say or feel that impact investing is only in the private markets. Well, we believe it's in all of the asset classes and wherever we play across the private market, private debt, public equity, and private equity, alternative assets, we can play with an impact-oriented lens and approach in all of those assets. We need to move from being small to institutional to attract the bigger pools of capital. So on one side, as we've seen those geopolitical factors compound some of the social and environmental issues that we're facing, the need for more capital to come into helping to solve those, aligned with some of our bigger picture aims, needs to be more significant and more targeted. So the areas we're focused on to actually answer your question are really thinking about the pools of capital that are out there across all platforms, and a large pool of those capital are in corporates, family offices, endowments, foundations, and so forth. And institutional investors like pension funds. And those are the levers, those are the target audiences we're trying to move forward with to give them institutional quality opportunities that demonstrate the possibility of delivering impact as well as delivering financial returns, which are core to their mandate, core to their needs for sustainability, core to their, in the case of pension plans, to their members' needs for having ongoing assets to service the member liabilities. So those are the audiences we're trying to tap into, but trying to dispel the myths of impact investing, greater education, greater examples, greater opportunities to really showcase the importance of delivering the returns and the impact for the creation of both better society and better opportunities in the companies that we invest in.
When you think about leadership in our industry today, Upkar, what are your passions or what are your thoughts on what really matters as industry leaders?
I think we're at a really important point, and no matter where you sit in terms of the audience that will listen to this, whether those are asset allocators, asset owners, companies, whether you're sitting on retirement or pension funds or institutional investors, I think there's a unique opportunity for leadership. And that leadership needs now to be thinking about something a little bit more than financial return, given where we are as a country. I think one of the great things we've done as a country is we've been bridge builders. We brought people together to do great things. I think it's really an opportunity for courage and leadership, no matter where you sit in this sector, to ensure economic prosperity, opportunity, and continued ability for our kids to thrive in the country that we have been so fortunate to be part of.
I couldn't agree more. I think it's such an interesting thing. Talk about impact and how you don't necessarily have to make a trade-off for returns in order to have a positive impact on society. I think that's true of leadership too. I mean, all of us have many different ways we could spend our time and focus our careers. But there's just a real call, uh, to leaders to really be thinking about the biggest possible picture. And I'm noticing a shift in many of my clients and their ethos. Maybe that's partly as you get to a stage in your career where you've really lived enough to see, look, you can grind it out for anyone. So why not grind it out for the betterment of the community you live in?
I can't speak to you, but as a newcomer to Canada, I mean, one of the reasons people come here is to create a better life for their kids. And it becomes an obligation and a responsibility to do what we can to make sure that that happens. So,
Yeah, and you have that depth of experience and expertise that is not common in your competitive landscape. So part of getting the story out is also saying that many people might be using this word, but here's how we're bringing much more rigor and lived experience and investing experience to bear, which for me, as someone who got to know your business through that work together, really did make you shine as a team. Let's talk about working together. What was it like to work with Epok? What would be your advice to other CEOs and executive teams?
yeah, I think what I would say, and I think now when I sort of share my experience with you, which you well know, and maybe you can counter or validate as the case may be, I'm looking at it from the perspective of maybe three lenses. One is that I ran my own small consulting company for more than a decade, providing advice to small to mid-sized companies. I have been in leadership positions in small organizations and large organizations, and I've been on boards and sit on boards now where the retention of consultants, either by being the party delivering or the party receiving those consulting services, I have a little bit of experience on that. And so when we reached out to you and to other people that we wanted to engage, what was really important to us was, there's core elements, but one of them was credibility, expertise in the space. We were at a point where we have a small team, as you know, we're working so much in the business, but not on
Yeah.
the business. And so
Yeah.
that external lens of giving us that universal, that outside in perspective was going to be so critical from a cross section of different experiences, different profiles, different customers, whether that's, from a private client standpoint, an institutional standpoint, and so forth. And so that was really important. But probably more for us and less so in other situations I've seen, we weren't doing this to create cover, to sort of, basically justify what we already knew we wanted to do. As I've seen in many cases at boards or in bigger organizations, we wanted to be able to go to someone that could actually cause us to, listen, take notice, and challenge us and provoke us with questions to say, are you sure that's what you want? Is that really realistic? Or what are the problems or issues? And so I think we were looking for someone who would actually bring that perspective, but not in a sort of one size fits all. Here's my methodology, I'm going to apply it to you. Because as you said, we're unique in some ways, and we wanted that customized, flexible, agile, iterative approach to saying, and I think you challenged us on this, how do you stay core to your mission, true to your mission, while still think about where can you play, how can you win, what do you need to win, how can you differentiate yourself and really carve out that moat for yourself? And those are really, really important questions to challenge and provoke us. So we wanted someone who would be taking an agile, customized, flexible approach, who would be cognizant of our core mission and purpose and be responsive to that. And what I've seen before is often consultants are hired and what they end up doing is parroting and pandering. And what that means is they're really there to reinforce what management wants to do and parrot that back
Right.
to them and pander to what management believes they already know. Whereas I think what you provided us with was really, the opposite to that. I think you really forced us to think about the assumptions and elevate our thinking. So challenged us, elevated our thinking to make sure that you brought in a different objective perspective with some distance and clarity that we couldn't have seen for ourselves. And so, I'd say I thought the working relationship was, I'm going to say it was challenging at times. We were forced to reflect and challenge our biases and our assumptions. But I think that was actually the beauty and the value and the end product is we got to a place that wasn't where we might have thought we were going to go. It might not have been the way we wanted to go, but I think it got us to a better solution and better outcome and better strategy for moving forward. So I thought it was a really healthy, productive, agile way to work with an advisor who really brought some objectivity, credibility, and expertise while being attuned to what was really critical and non-negotiable from our standpoint.
Well, thanks for that. That was a very detailed answer. And I certainly feel similarly, like the collaboration and the back and forth. And frankly, you guys were quite a busy team too, right? So a big part of it was meeting you where you are and being able to fit the thinking in between the many things. To your point, you were, really working in the business. So we were able to do that work together, some really deep thinking work while still not really ripping people out from what they were doing day to day.
Yeah, no, I think that worked well because you talked to us as a team collectively to make sure we were aligned. You talked to us individually. You had separate conversations. And even that I think was helpful because as you know, and as we see all the time on boards with groupthink and not wanting to be out of line with what the rest of the team, board, or leadership team is thinking, there's less propensity or tendency to be really honest, to really surface, critical, I'm going to say assumptions or questions or risks. And so I think that was helpful for you to bring that back to us in a way that didn't require us to be as sort of confrontational or in your face. So no, I thought it was really worthwhile, given that the desire was a better outcome, not just basically checking off a box and validating what we already thought we wanted to do.
That's great. And once a client, always a client, Upkar. So we'll, I'm sure, be finding other ways to work together. Let's talk a little bit about your board work. What you feel about the state of governance in our industry, and what you see as a director in your travels, and maybe just broadly why you think it's an important part of what you do.
I think the important part of the board work is really because ultimately, and it goes back to what we touched on earlier, which is in the volatility, uncertainty we're seeing, the expectations of directors, especially directors on boards, have really increased, and therefore the requirements for directors to have greater knowledge and insight over issues. And what would some of those issues be? Well, that a significant number of companies have been exposed to some form of cybersecurity. We know that the pandemic disrupted supply chains. We know that tariffs are disrupting, typical supply chains now with cross-border
Right.
traffic with the U.S. And we're seeing much more hunkering down of doing things domestically. And obviously our response from a Canadian government standpoint to breaking down interprovincial barriers, thinking about new markets, new relationships. And so all these issues are really adding to the workload of directors. And of course, we haven't even talked about the very significant implications of climate change as it relates to the impact of climate change, both on your business as well as the host of reporting requirements related to climate change. So all those are increasing the requirements of directors to have a good grasp and understanding of those issues. And yet I feel that in many ways our approach to governance is still reflective of a very slow move to ensuring that the right skills are there on boards to be able to respond proactively. And there's this phrasing that we're trying to use a little bit more of moving from hindsight to foresight, hindsight to insight to foresight. So now we're not thinking about where most boards have been spending their time is on historical financials, historical performance, and looking at what are the factors that are going to disrupt, challenge, and fundamentally cause us to need to respond to anticipated threats. What are the scenarios that will result? So I think the volume of requirements of what we need to consider is increasing. The level of uncertainty and lack of predictability is increasing. And so the need for really thinking through more, I'm going to say more agile and different governance structures is also really, really important. And we're still facing the same asymmetry of information where leadership teams know more than board members.
Yeah.
So certainly in the boards that we're on or that I'm on, we really try to move towards being really thoughtful about the questions we're asking, thinking about the impact of those questions on the forward strategy and implications to the firm, and thinking really carefully about that. So I think the role of governance is actually amplifying and increasing, and we need to adapt and adopt different approaches to dealing with that and make sure we've got the right skills. By the way, I haven't even mentioned AI and the implications of
Yeah,
AI.
I was going to say
which,
that
yeah.
90% of my interactions with boards right now, because I get invited in quite often to do board facilitation around innovation or around AI. like so much of what I'm seeing is this thirst of knowledge from boards, uh, to equip themselves and to stress test whether or not the executive teams are equipped to understand the fast moving changes we're seeing, and specifically around AI, new tech, and some of the sort of emerging trends within wealth and asset management. So almost every time I interact with boards, at least lately, it's been in that capacity where they want to sponge up as much innovation knowledge and as many examples from other markets or from other industries that they can. I often don't get to be in the room as an advisor when the sort of everyday work of the board is going on. It's almost always in those innovation settings.
And so, what's your experience then on some of those other factors and the need for the skill set, the composition, the attributes, and the ability to be really thoughtful about the questions? Is that an area you've seen that boards are focusing on more?
Yeah, I think what I've noticed over the years is a real shift towards moving away from the sort of the readout style, the passive style of governance to much more active governance. And I think that all comes from pace and change. That, to your point, moving from hindsight oriented, if all you're doing is reading out your performance, then obviously you're going to know more about your performance than me. So I'm going to listen. Versus if you're starting to do some scenario planning and starting to talk about different paths, all of a sudden we're equal in our ability to look at those situations. So I've definitely noticed that. Like I said, I've noticed a lot more orientation towards learning. Like I think back to 15 years ago, going to board offsites almost every time. I was like a microcosm on the agenda to give like the future of advice readout. Now, oftentimes, when I do board facilitation, it's centered. It's the center of the agenda. It's like, no, we actually have decided as a board, we really want to learn. We really want to, and we want to learn in a collaborative way, not in a readout way. All of us can, read a bunch of articles, but we actually want to discuss how it impacts our business. And then the other thing that I show up for is executive teams, maybe who have worked with me and the team who are presenting the outcome of our work to boards. And, I've always done that. That's a big part of being in consulting, as you mentioned, like helping executive teams and then pitching what you've worked on. But there's a difference in the rigor or the depth I've noticed over the last bit. I think because so much is changing and you can't rest on laurels or assumptions, I've really noticed, even in committee, but certainly, in more working sessions with board members, that there's a desire to really understand the work, understand what was excluded, what was included. Like to your point, in the work we did together, what doors were subconsciously being closed? What things were we setting a lower bar on than we could have? Those types of questions, I think back 15 years ago, I wouldn't have gotten as much from directors. Now I find them quite interested in rolling up their sleeves. And that could be like, to your point, a talent profile, like widening the circle of who's sitting on boards. It could be a pace of change or a different mindset profile, but I've definitely noticed a change.
Yeah, certainly. I'll just give you one example. On one of the boards I sit on, we almost have this three-part sort of framing about leadership, or not leadership as much as training and development is so core. So there's the parts that relate to more a compliance layer, a regulatory layer.
Right.
Then there's the parts that relate to the stuff happening in the business. But in fact, in the next day, I have to put together an individual development plan for this board about the specific areas based on the feedback that we do on an annual basis, where it's been identified that I need to be stronger in. What's my plan for developing in those areas? And I have to report back to governance on that,
Yeah.
about how I've accomplished those objectives. And so that aspect of continuous learning, not just in broad-based generalized AI, but in specific issues that affect both the business and your competency, capability, understanding, and awareness of the issues that are going to be core or salient to the business going forward. So I've certainly seen a much greater commitment to that at all those three levels for sure.
Yeah, well, that's good, right? I think that's good because then people are bringing their whole capability set to bear. To your point, like that, you're really thinking about the attributes of those leaders as well as their CVs. Let's shift gears. Talk to me about, if you were a young person or if you were coaching a young person entering our industry today, what would you encourage them to focus on? And certainly your team skews young. You have a lot of really talented young people. Tell me what you're learning from them.
I mean, I think the first thing I'm learning, and I think it came up even, we had a team meeting last week and we've got 3 interns. Just to give you an idea, some of these interns would be probably 22 to 24, and one of the interns did part of our report back on our quarterly team meeting. And the first thing I have to say is that some of these individuals at these levels are just outstanding in terms of their core abilities, their poise, their communication abilities, and so forth. So I think we have to recognize the talent and the capability and the capacity of these individuals, which is very sophisticated in dealing with complex information and being able to summarize, synthesize, and report back. And so I think it's first and foremost an acknowledgement that there's a great number of people with very significant talent capabilities. I think what I would say coming into this profession is that the profession is changing significantly. AI is having a dramatic role. As we think about the areas that AI is playing, it is more in the areas that tend to be a little bit more the research side, the analytical side, the pattern recognition side, and so forth. And so the movement towards thinking about and so I think it's going to be really important. It's come up in several conversations, even in our own firm as well, is that the challenge with AI, and I just read 2 research reports recently that said AI is making us dumber, but the challenge with AI is that to the extent we develop this mental laziness about asking or using AI or ChatGPT or Copilot as effectively a search engine, is that we actually have no ability to discern or judge the output or outcome of that query or that question, right? I've certainly experienced it in using it where the results have been completely flawed, completely erroneous, and completely factually incorrect. And so I think there needs to be a tendency to make sure we learn enough content and technical skills to develop the judgment of understanding what makes sense and what doesn't. That would be one. The second is really use the AI tools to further the work, to make it more efficient and effective, and to challenge and to use all the capacities of AI to try to do that. When we've done our AI strategy, we've got sort of a roadmap and a framework. We've centered it around the use of AI, to what purpose, guided by what principles, given that we're an impact investment firm. So those are pretty salient to us and pretty important to us. And so use AI in order to do that, but continue to develop some of those other skills, which I don't like the terminology called soft skills, and Seth Godin refers to them as human skills, but the skills related to how do you collaborate, how do you communicate, how do you demonstrate pro-social tendencies, how do you engage in difficult conversations, how do you challenge effectively, all those things. I find some of those skills we need to develop a lot further because we're no longer spending time on the creation, but more on the understanding, what it means, and then the implication of that as it relates to better decision making. So it's still developing the judgment aspects and judgment. And you know this from all the work that you've done and the fact that you've got decades of experience as well, is that the companies are about people. Leadership is about motivating, aligning, inspiring people, right? And so it is about creating that connection. And we know that there's a huge gap between effective teams and non-effective teams or ineffective teams. And there are certain elements that really come back to the value we bring in motivating, encouraging, guiding those individuals to do their best work in a collaborative and shared basis. And so,
yeah, I often find myself, I've had 2 interns this summer and it's been amazing, but you have to remind yourself everything is so easy to package today and research today, to your point. Sometimes to even just explain what your thought process is and how you knew that thing that was spat out didn't make sense, right? Like, what was the thought process that allowed you to stress test that, and making sure that they have enough experience. And if I was a young person, making sure I was around leaders that would take the time to explain the logic, the thinking, and the perspective that let them know that there was something missing or there was a misassumption or a bias there. It's going to be a really interesting few years as we all get normalized into using these tools. And to your point, there's just so much talent out there. We got to figure out how to tap into it.
I think Kendra, and you're younger than me, but for people who are a bit older than the incoming talent we're seeing, I think it also creates a challenge for us to up our game and to be more effective and really understand where can we provide value. And I referred to an experience that, based on a book by Chip Conley, who talked about coming in as executive chair of Airbnb and reporting to Brian Chesky, who was 35 and Chip Conley was 53. And he outlines this really important interchange or exchange that happens between the emotional intelligence and the technology or intellectual intelligence, and how to bridge those to actually get the best output, outcomes, and benefit of people. There is a benefit in that wisdom and experience and so forth, not just the technical side, because ultimately we are dealing with products and services with people. And so I think we just need to keep remembering that.
So in addition to the work at Rally Assets, you're also involved in a social finance fund. You and I didn't work on that together, but I'd love to learn more about it.
Yeah, I'm super excited by it because I think it can have a profound impact in Canada. So the Social Finance Fund, very, very quickly, is the Government of Canada's $400 million commitment to social finance or impact investing. We at Rally, through our subsidiary Realize Capital Partners, are one of 3 fund of funds managers. And what we are engaged in right now is raising an additional $135 million to anchor the government's commitment of $135 to create a large pool from which we can invest in social finance intermediaries or other funds, which we're going to do great work for social purpose organizations. So we are looking to raise that. And what that will do is deliver better outcomes for people across the country who are really committed to and driven by creating social change in Canada. And it sort of ties back to why this is so important at this time in our fight for cultural identity and sovereignty, and really ensuring that we think about the longer term implications of the geopolitical factors, and ensuring we've got thriving economic prosperity, entrepreneurialism that's really driving this. So it's a great public-private initiative that systems changing that I think is going to have a very significant impact.
Well, that's a great place to land. The importance of impact, the importance of people, and the importance of diversity are all core to impact investing, and I think and really core to the work that you and I have done together. So I just want to take a moment and thank you. If folks want to find Rally Assets, to find Upkar, what's the best way to direct them?
I think the easiest way would be just through our website, rallyassets.com. And we've got another website related to the social finance fund that I mentioned earlier called Realize Capital Partners. So people can find us there. People can find us on LinkedIn. And in terms of any other typical conferences and others, we are normally on panels and conferences. I think we're doing 6 or 7 in the next couple months. And so we are quite visible in a lot of these platforms related to responsible investing, impact investing, and other adjacent areas where we can really use our capital to drive meaningful change.
That's great. Thank you so much for being a client who was willing to talk about our work together, because sometimes clients can't do that. And thank you for joining us today, Upkar. I really enjoyed the conversation.
My pleasure. Thank you, Kendra.
I enjoyed the conversation with Upkar, and I'm grateful anytime a client is willing to go on the record and talk about working with Epok Advice. Today I learned a lot about his views on impact investing, governance, and leadership. If you're sitting on a board or looking to do strategy that needs to be pitched to a board, we'd love to partner with you.